Have you ever seen a preview for a movie, like a trailer, and watched it and thought, man, this is going to be an incredible film? And then you went and watched the film and thought, that wasn't as good. That's kind of what we're dealing with here. So in keeping with the movie metaphor, when we saw the trailer, we saw the preview for this device, we were pretty excited and we couldn't wait for it to come out, but it took a long time to do so. It was back in August that we first caught wind of it, and when we saw the spec sheet and we saw the pictures, it was a really exciting time, and we thought, hey, Acer has finally come up and really brought a proper successor to the Acer Chromebook 14. And unfortunately, that just doesn't feel like the case, and it's for a number of reasons, and so we want to talk about why. So before we get into all the pros and cons of this device, this video is brought to you by NordVPN, and they are the VPN of choice for millions of users because simply they're just the best at doing it, and they can secure your browsing whether you're on an iPhone or a Chromebook or an Android device. Go over to chromeunbox.com/NordVPN if you'd like to learn more today. All right, so let's break this thing down piece by piece. But first, I want to mention the price points on this one. So it starts at $399 for the Apollo Lake version. I would not recommend that. I don't recommend Apollo Lakes in many situations, honestly. It goes up to $499 for the Pentium, the N4200, same thing that we saw on the Acer Chromebook 15 that came out before this. And while it gets along okay, some of you are probably already going, $499 for the Pentium? This is an entry-level chip, and you're right for thinking that. And so that's going to color a lot of the things I have to say about everything with this device because price matters. We've got a lot of great Chromebooks in the roughly $500 range, and so it matters a lot when we start talking about all the internal pieces of this particular device if the price stays at $500. All right, so let's start with the build quality. Not great, not terrible. It's just kind of middle of the road here. Mostly aluminum and put together pretty well, firm, it feels good in the hand, that kind of stuff. But there are some sharp edges, and anytime there are sharp edges, to me, it just makes a device feel a little half-baked. And so I kind of just got that feeling from this. It's not that it's creaky or flimsy or anything. It's nice and firm, and it's substantial enough too. 3.3 pounds and about 3/4 of an inch in thickness. It's not the thinnest device on the market, but it looks good on a table. It looks good if you're at the coffee shop. It's not like it's some hideous or ugly device. It's pretty well put together. It just didn't inspire anything out of me. It didn't make me think, oh man, I love that thing. I love looking at it. Look how good this thing looks on my desk. It was just kind of like, yeah, there it is. So once we crack this thing open and get to the display, we're met with a full HD anti-glare 14-inch display, and it's IPS. The viewing angles are nice and wide, and it's flanked on either side by really thin bezels, and I like that part about it. And the viewing angles are great, and the colors are good, and there's nothing really bad about this display. It was just a little off-putting for me being anti-glare because anti-glare coating adds a slight bit of fuzziness to any display. It doesn't matter this one, any other display also. And for me, 1080p on a 14-inch display feels really good, especially with Chrome OS's scaling ability. Things stay sharp and it looks really nice. All the other displays that we've done and done reviews on at 14 inches, I like that resolution on this screen size. It doesn't tax the processor and it still looks nice and sharp. And this has all that going for it, but with the anti-glare display, there's just a slight fuzziness to some of the text. And if you work from an anti-glare display and you like those, maybe this doesn't bother you at all. But for me, it was just a little bit off-putting. But overall, I mean, the display's not bad. Probably 250 nits or so of brightness. It's touchscreen, and touchscreen on anti-glare is kind of rare. So it has some cool things going for it. But overall, it was just another piece of this Chromebook that was a little bit average. Moving down to the keyboard and trackpad, these were two of my least favorite parts of this Chromebook, honestly, and I'm kind of bummed about that because part of the spec sheet, again, with this device was, man, backlit keyboard, Gorilla Glass trackpad, and you look at the pictures and you see the etching around it, and it looked large, and it is. It's a nice large trackpad, and it's glass, so it's nice and smooth. Those things, great, well done. And backlighting for me, always welcome. It looks good. It's an added bonus. It's a nice thing to have on any laptop. But it kind of goes downhill from there because the keys are a little mushy and lacked a lot of click. The travel was good on them, but for me, travel without a nice clicky responsiveness almost is worse than a low amount of travel and having clicky responsiveness. Ultimately, you just want to be able to know that you press the key. And there were a lot of times I just wasn't quite sure. And so I didn't enjoy typing on this thing at all. And I'm not really hard on keyboards in general. And so just was not impressed with it at all. Moving down to the trackpad, again, the gestures feel really good and the size of the trackpad's great, but it did that thing that I've talked about in other videos where the trackpad's sitting just above the click mechanism, so you can tap it and you can hear it kind of clicking around before it actually engages anything. So you almost get like this double click action, and it was kind of firm, and so it felt like work to use the trackpad. And that's just unfortunate, especially for a big glass trackpad. You just expect if they're going to put glass on it, the whole thing's going to be put together well. And unfortunately, at least on our test model, that just wasn't the case here either. And so once again, I was just kind of let down by the experience of using this device when it came to the keyboard and trackpad. Now, not everything is terrible about this Chromebook. The port selection on it actually is really good and really thoughtful. It's a USB Type-C on both sides and a USB Type-A on both sides. And that just gives you some really nice flexibility, whether you're working at a coffee shop or whether you're plugged in at your desk. It's just nice to be able to access both of those ports on either side of the device at any given time. It's also flanked with a Kensington lock, a headphone microphone jack, and an SD card slot like most Chromebooks, but I just really like the way that Acer put those two ports on both sides of this one. With the speakers, we're kind of getting back into the mode of average. This is actually below average, honestly. I'm not usually really hard on speakers. I don't expect too much from laptop speakers. These are pretty bad. They're loud. The volume of them is loud, but man, they're just full of middle tones. And if you know anything about music or sound, pumping the mids up is not something you want to do too often if you want something that actually sounds pleasing to the ear. So I mean, take all the bass out, take all the treble out, and just like force the mids up. And that's kind of what these things sound like. And they're bottom firing and just they're just below average, honestly, unless you're just looking for something that's loud. They do that. They are loud. Now, internally, I talked about this earlier in the video. Internally, this one we're testing is the Pentium N4200, 8 gigs of RAM, 64 gigs of internal storage. There is a lesser model for $100 less that comes with the Apollo Lake 3450, 4 gigs of RAM, 32 gigs of internal storage. Because of the performance of Apollo Lake in general, especially at a $400 price point, there's just no way I can recommend that anyone goes and buys that particular model. The N4200 in this one does give it enough of a performance increase that I wasn't too bothered working from it on a daily basis. It didn't bother me that much. Honestly, I was way more bothered by the keyboard and the trackpad and parts of the screen. Honestly, the performance wasn't the part where it just fell apart for me. There were obvious hiccups when compared to using something like a Pixelbook or especially any of these devices that came out at the end of 2018 with that Core i3 or Core i5 in them. I mean, those things just absolutely fly, and I never thought about performance. This one I would remember quite a bit. Like I would forget for maybe 10, 20 minutes, and then something would happen and you'd see some stuttering on the screen or whatever, and I'd remember, yeah, I'm dealing with an entry-level processor here. And again, that's worth thinking about as we kind of wrap this video up towards the end. This is an entry-level processor, so if you're expecting to do big projects, have tons of tabs open, and really like edit photos or do some basic video editing or really get into some Android games, you're going to be limited with this one. Even though 8 gigs of RAM and 64 gigs of internal storage are nice, the processor in this one is definitely not the highest performer. On a slightly more positive note, the battery life on this device is as expected, somewhere between 8 and 10 hours of mixed use. I ended up a little bit lower than that on certain occasions because I kind of like my screen bright, and to get this one bright enough for me to kind of like using it, I kept it in like the 80 to 90% brightness range, and that is going to knock some time off your battery, and that's just part of it. A lot of devices you can hover around that 60 to 70% and it looks great. With the screen being a little dimmer on this one, you do have to crank it up if you want that brighter screen in certain environments, and that's obviously going to have a hit on the battery, but overall, battery performs as expected on it. So in wrapping up, let's revisit that movie metaphor. So we saw the spec sheet, we saw this thing in pictures and all that kind of stuff, and we got really excited and we're really, really pumped to get our hands on it. Time went by, we now have it, and we're just less than overwhelmed with it. We're less than excited about it. It's just okay in general. And while that might be okay, you go to a movie and you see the movie and you go, that was okay. And you feel like, well, Kind of wish I wouldn't have seen it, but it was okay. And I'm not gonna go ask for my money back. I'm not gonna like get upset about it. That's kind of how I feel with this device. It didn't live up to all the things that we hoped. It's just okay. And that's okay in most cases. It's okay for a device to be average. It's okay for all the spec sheets and all the pieces not to come together and quite make it. But it's not okay at $499. And so at the end of the day, when we have to help you make a purchasing decision and say, yeah, I think you should go buy this, there's just no way for me to say that with this device when devices like the HP X360 or Lenovo C630 or Dell Inspiron Chromebook 14, when those devices exist in the market and come on sale for less than what Acer's asking for this particular device, it's just impossible for me to tell you to go and buy this. There's just nothing it does better than any of those devices. Now, that being said, if the price comes down in a few months and you're watching this video and it's $299 at Costco or something like that, completely different scenario. It's a completely different discussion because now I'm not as hard on the display. Now I'm not as hard on performance. Now I'm not as hard on keyboard and trackpad. And so if that's the case, yeah, go for it. I just don't know that it's going to come down in price anytime soon. But if it does, man, it would be a great buy. But at this moment right now, MSRP $499, I just can't tell you to go and buy this Chromebook. But guys, that's been it for this one. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. And until next time, we'll see you.